Have a quorum present, and we also have our presenter here with it joining us this morning. I will start us off. I'm going to ask Senator Jackson if you'll lead us in a word of prayer. What number is that?
This one, sir.
Okay, I got you.
12. Let's bow our heads. Dear Lord, thank you for bringing your servants together. Lord, guide us, lead us, comfort us, Lord. Lord, help us make this state a better place. Lord, as we come together this morning, we thank you. We give you our blessings. But more than Lord, we ask for your glory. Walk with us and talk with us, Lord, as we make decisions to make Georgia a better place. Bless the people assembled here today. Bless the people that's assembled here today. And let us follow your guidance from your word. These and other blessings we ask in your heavenly name. We all say amen.
Amen. All right, Senator Miller. Today we have Senate Bill 588 and Senate Bill 601 you're presenting. And if you'd like to, we'll start with Senate Bill 588.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I come before you today to present Senate Bill 588 to address concerns that brought to me, particularly in our local counties. We've seen parents treated unfairly by boards of education because of their political views or disagreements, and they have been arrested and barred from attending future meetings simply by voicing their concerns. We've seen the Department of Justice referring to parents as terrorists, which I think is completely inappropriate, and this is the opposite approach that our government should be taking. In fact, I believe that no parent should abdicate the education of their child to anyone else. You are the primary person responsible. This measure reiterates the open requirement meetings, as well as provides for recourse for those who are treated unjustly. And the bill sends a statement to boards who would abuse their authority, and provides parents opportunity for involvement. Going through the bill briefly, if I could direct members, I'm working off Senate Bill 588 LC 490912.
Yes, sir.
And if we'd go to line 19, I think some of the items of interest would be that no member of the public shall be removed from the public meeting of local school board except for an actual disruption and in accordance to the meetings. So that means that you can't just be arbitrarily exited from the meeting, but it also means you have to follow the rules of the meeting. So it's that knife cuts both ways, so to speak. In line 23, it says visual and sound recordings shall be permitted at all meetings of the local boards of education that are open to the public. And then I think another point of interest would be line 39, that reasonable attorney's fees and litigation costs on behalf of those who might have been unjustly removed or treated. And then on line 44, nothing in this subsection shall be construed to limit the authority of any law of an enforcement officer. That is the highlights of the bill. It's very simple, very straightforward. And I'd very much appreciate the committee's favorable consideration.
All right, you have some questions for the committee. Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pro Tem, thank you for being here this morning.
My pleasure.
So when I read line 19, and I'm working off of LC 490912, no member of the public shall be removed from a public meeting of local board of education except for actual disruption. So I want to ask you, does that mean speaking out loud, making noise, being unruly in a meeting?
I would consider those disruptions, yes.
Well, I mean, even if our own chamber, if someone claps, that we have the right to remove them from our body. Am I right, sir?
That is correct.
But under this bill, we're not giving them the same right and privileges that we dictate to ourselves.
I think
right,
when
sir?
you cross the line and become disruptive, that's a different issue.
Right.
When you're voicing approval, when you're participating, I think that's acceptable in our chamber, and it's acceptable in these meetings. This is not a basketball game. This is a serious matter. It involves serious subjects, and it should involve a serious attitude and a serious approach. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, sir. Follow-up questions with that, Mr. Pro Tem?
Certainly.
What about in the occasions of an executive meeting? No one's allowed to go to executive session. Am I correct, sir?
This is a public meeting, is what we're referring to.
So does the school board has the right to declare all their meetings executive sessions?
I don't believe that's the case.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Well, it's not the case in this law, in this bill. Thank you.
Have we noticed that happening a lot in our great state, or are there more than one occasions where school boards been kicking people out for no reason at all?
You may be more knowledgeable on that than I.
Thank you, Mr. Pro Tem. I appreciate it, sir.
Thank you.
Senator Parent?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Miller. So you went a little fast, so I'm a little unclear what the problem is that the bill is seeking to address by putting this into law.
The obstruction of the process of the school board meeting. That's what it's seeking to address, and making sure that those who do obstruct are dismissed, but they're not retaliated against.
Well, that seems reasonable. I just don't really know what the obstruction is that's necessitating changes to state law.
The difficulty would be that people would be punished unduly and treated unfairly for voicing their opinion in a reasonable way. It doesn't say that you can be obstructive. It doesn't say that you can be disruptive, but it says those in accordance with the rules of the conduct of the meeting. So if the conduct of the meeting is permitted to clap, then it would be okay to clap. But if the conduct of the rules of the committee are not, then we'd have to follow that as well.
Well, that brings up an interesting point, because it would seem to me then that we would need to be a little bit more prescriptive if we were going down this road of codifying this sort of thing about what actual disruption means. Like, does it mean, as you just maybe suggested, although I don't want to put words in your mouth, that it's violative of the rules that have been put in place by that local school board?
I'm sorry? I beg your pardon?
Well,
Would
so
you
what I'm
repeat that
saying
question?
is, so actual disruption is vague, right? And so I understood you to just say, well, that would mean that they are violating the rules of that local school board and how the meetings are to be conducted. So if that's the case, and that's what that means, then I would submit that we would need to put that in here, because otherwise it's very unclear what actual disruption means.
I would
I believe
respectfully
does not, I mean, just
disagree.
on line 22, it says, line 20.
Oh, yeah, I see it. Okay.
It says rules of conduct for
Published.
meeting open to the public, adopted and published by the
Actual
local
disruption of
Board
the proceedings, and so then you could, I would then consider whether or not you need actual disruption. The other question I have, Mr. Pro Tem, is, so it just seems to me, I would like your thoughts on, I'm not aware, and maybe I'm wrong, so please, enlighten me if I am, but I'm not aware of, we also have meetings that we are supposed to run certain ways, and I'm just not aware, all this from lines 34 through 43 involving the superior courts and all this other stuff. I'm just not aware, sort of following up on what the senator from the 2nd was saying, that we conduct ourselves in such a way and have this type of codified prescription for how our meetings are to be conducted, and it seems to me very heavy-handed and hypocritical to be putting all this stuff in state code that we don't, to a standard that we don't at all hold ourselves to.
Thank you very much for sharing your view.
I wanted your thoughts on
Was
why
that a
that
question?
would. Yeah, it was. Yeah, I said
there
I
was a
wanted
question in there somewhere.
Yeah, there
I'm
was.
sure.
Yes,
I'm just
there
not
was.
sure what it was.
The question was, can you please enlighten me and speak on why you think it's appropriate to dictate to every local school board across the state things in state code that we do not, that are standards that we do not hold ourselves to in conducting our meetings as a General Assembly?
I think that we do hold ourselves to a certain order and a certain decorum, and we have had in the past individuals over the years who have been asked to change their behavior or change their decorum based on the mores and the rules and the guidelines set forth by, if you're referring to the state senate or you're just referring to meetings in general.
What I'm referring
But
to is,
I'm trying to answer your question.
yeah, so-
So
I'm
it
sorry,
says
go
that,
ahead.
it
Yeah.
says open to the public, adopted and published by the local school board.
what I'm asking about, Mr. Pro Tem, is these Superior Court involvement, attorney's fees that can be assessed in favor of the complaining party, litigation costs. Why
Well, if
wouldn't that also be appropriate for us?
I'm not bringing a bill that's for the state senate. I'm bringing a bill that's for the school boards. And I would say that if you think that we need that measure, I would certainly, not sure that it'd be in this committee, maybe it'd be in government oversight. Maybe you should bring that bill. But thank you very much for your thought.
Thank you.
All right, Senator Gooch.
To make a motion to do pass Senate Bill 588, LC number 490912.
Who is the second? There are questions, but we've had a motion and a second on the floor. Any further discussion? All right. Who's 14? Senator Halpern?
Good morning. I have a question related to line 17, where it says, all meetings of a local board of education shall be open to the public. I do wonder, just to pick up on Senator Jackson's prior comment, because I am a member of a lot of boards, and there are times when it's very appropriate for us to be in executive session, and that part of the meeting is not necessarily open to the public for good cause and reason. And so here, that word all specifically is the question that I have for you. Is it meant to exclude executive session? Is it meant to never allow our local boards of eds to actually have meetings without the public attendance?
I think you could construe it that way if you so desired, but this is referring to open board meetings. And it refers to that as well.
Well, but it doesn't.
Go ahead.
It does. I don't think. So my question is, granted, I'm not a lawyer, so Ledge Counsel can speak better to this. But because it says all and could be construed that way, if that's not the intention, and we do intend to still allow executive sessions, might we then consider tightening that part up so it's clear that and of course, no local school board's going to have. They're never going to put every meeting as an executive session meeting. They're, of course, going to continue to have their public meetings.
So I happen to have a lawyer with me that can speak to that.
Fantastic.
Senator, the way this bill is written, in our opinion, it simply reiterates the law as it already exists in the Georgia Open Meetings Act, but adds the injunctive relief that y'all were previously discussing for when that act is violated. But it just wouldn't change anything as far as executive session or matters that should not be open to the public, such as administrative matters and personnel and that type of thing.
Thank you for your question.
All right, since we're technically in discussion, this is not a time for Q&A anymore, so if there's discussion on the bill, we can have that discussion on the committee. And so, is there any further discussion on this bill?
I just want to make one comment to the last point about executive session. I think Georgia law is pretty clear about what school boards can do related to executive session. I think you have to advertise as a school board that you're going into executive session, and I think the results of that executive session have to be discussed in public once the school board comes out of executive session. So I think those rules and laws are pretty clear, and probably already answer this specific to. The other thing I just want to make note of is the added transparency of lines 23 and 24 for the citizens of Georgia to show up to a local board of education meeting, and us writing it to the code that visual and sound recordings are permitted at open school board meetings, and I would consider this just an extra layer of sunshine to local school boards to make sure that the citizens are never, have a barrier or roadblock to that point. So, I think this bill is fine.
All right, which council has?
Mr. Chairman, I would just direct the attention to line 45 and the reference there to Chapter 14 of Title 50. That is the Open Meetings Act, and so this bill specifically says nothing in this subsection shall be construed to limit the application or enforcement of the Open Meetings Act. So the Open Meetings Act is left untouched. It still applies as it would to all meetings of local school boards. They are public agencies under the Open Meetings Act, so their meetings are covered by that law, except to the extent that they go into executive session, which is also provided for in that law. This law would not interfere with that law.
All right, thank you, sir. Yeah, Senator Albers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think just clarifying, I think we heard great things from our different committee members, but I think when you boil this down, this is making sure that those parents who show up at a school board meeting that may have a different perspective than those who are actually serving the school board could not be silenced nor removed from that school board meeting. And if we truly believe in the rights of parents and we want to have more involvement, that this is a great transparency bill. And just like we do in committee meetings, or even if someone is in the gallery of the Senate, if there's a disturbance, usually there's a warning, letting folks know that, hey, simply that is not an acceptable behavior for that type of a meeting. After a couple of warnings, if someone is disrupting it, well, certainly you could deal with that appropriately, but I can't imagine why anyone would be against more parental involvement in schools. Thank you.
All right, thanks, sir. Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got a little bumper sticker on my car that says "Back to Blue." I believe our law enforcement officers that are in school board meetings already do this. They maintain order in all our meetings, and I just want them to continue to do their jobs. We put a lot of emphasis in backing the blue, but when it comes to parental rights and parental responsibilities, having young people in school, I understand. But they already have rights, and they have the opportunity to sign up and speak at school board meetings. But I think that the law enforcement officers, let them do their job to maintain order.
Thanks. Senator Parent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a parliamentary inquiry, which is anyone signed up to speak on this bill?
Yes, there are some that just signed up.
Well, I would submit that we should hear testimony before we vote on the motion.
We will hear testimony. I'll allow that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, we do have some sign up to it. I'm going to limit the test. A minute each, because we are literally at a hard stop at 10 o'clock and we've got much to consider. So
9:30.
Do what?
I thought it was 9:30. So
Right.
yeah.
So if you would like to let someone have access to the microphone, I guess you allow 1 minute each. And so first I'll call Justin Pauley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee members. My name is Justin Pauley. I'm with the Georgia School Boards Association. We don't believe that this legislation is necessary. Everything in SB 588 is already addressed in state law and required of school boards. The Open Meetings Act includes most of these provisions. There's not a need to add this legislation just for school boards. Chapter 14 of Title 50 shows that there are more requirements than what is in SB 588. If you do move this bill forward, we recommend including a reference to Chapter 14 of Title 50, perhaps on line 19 after meetings. State law also addresses disruptions in public meetings in 16-11-34. It would not be necessary for local boards to have to address this in their rules of conduct in order to deal with the disruption. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Next we have Buddy Cosley.
Good morning. My name is Buddy Carlson. I represent the Georgia Association of Educational Leaders. I don't have a whole lot of concerns. I really just have a couple of questions about the bill. As Justin from GSBA has shared, we do have elements in state law. I do want to read Code 1611-34 says, a person who recklessly or knowingly commits any act which may reasonably be expected to prevent or disrupt a lawful meeting, gathering, or procession is guilty of a misdemeanor. So I do have two questions for clarification. In the legislation that's being proposed today, it provides for injunctive relief. In current code section, if a person, any individual, parent or not, because we're not just talking about parents, we're talking about stakeholders of the entire community, taxpayers, et cetera, if they were to be charged with disruption of a board meeting, they would be technically guilty of a misdemeanor if they are convicted of that charge. The two questions to ask is how would that work? So would we have the right to press charges and file a criminal no trespass? And I'll give you an example, and I only have a minute, but I feel like it's a very important point just so that this works if it's passed, okay? So we have students that are often present at those board meetings, and it's similar to what we have at the school office. Sometimes we do have some parents and stakeholders that do not behave, follow decorum or safety rules, or just lace profanity because they're angry in front of children who are being awarded at board meetings or in the school office if they come in. So sometimes we have to file what's called a criminal no trespass.
I'll have to ask you to wrap it up.
The question is the law appears to be saying that we might not be able to have the authority to file a criminal no trespass. I would like to see if we could get some clarification on that. And how would it work? Would the injunctive relief compete with the misdemeanor that the person is charged with that has not been adjudicated regarding the charges of a misdemeanor? And I appreciate your time and thank you for your work.
All right, thank you.
I have to vote. It's very fast. If you'll indulge me. What was the code section that you were referencing on? 1611-34?
1611-34 is the, I'll read it again, I'm sorry. I was trying to, it says, I don't know the terminology, section A person who recklessly or knowingly commits any act which may reasonably be expected to prevent or disrupt a lawful meeting, gathering, or procession is guilty of a misdemeanor in the state of Georgia in current code section. So what we anticipate is a person is charged with a misdemeanor legally, then files injunctive relief. Who wins that process? And would a school system have the right to file a criminal no trespass, which sometimes is limited for like 2 or 3 months to ensure the safety of the kids or the stakeholders that are in the school? Because I fear that a parent may interpret this legislation to mean is you may be able to dismiss me today, but you have no authority to dismiss me next month, depending on the severity of the infraction. And that's what we feel like it's very important that there's clarification on that before this is put into stone.
Okay, well, I'll let the author of the bill address that when he comes back up to close. Next, we have Lisa Morgan.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, Senator Payne. Thank you, members of the committee. I'm Lisa Morgan. I'm a kindergarten teacher and president of the Georgia Association of Educators. And I would venture to say that I am probably the most experienced speaker at school board meetings in this room. I spoke before my local school board monthly from the spring of 2004 until I was elected to this position in 2020. I've seen a lot of things in school board meetings. I've seen disruptions. And we have laws currently to deal with those disruptions. And our school boards have policies and procedures in place to allow public input in their meetings. We are once again spending our short time here. We have 40 days to make public education better in our state. And we are spending time once again dealing with issues that are already covered in current law. I ask you to please, if it's already in current law, let's move on and do those things that we know we need to do to make public education better for the 1.8 million students in our state. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Senator Miller, would you like to come forward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the committee's detailed and thorough review of the bill, and I appreciate the individuals who came to speak, and appreciate them taking their time out. I just ask for the committee's favorable consideration.
All right. We have still a motion on the floor, so.
Call for questions, Steve.
If I'm recognized, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am really curious about the issues pointed out by Mr. Costley as it sort of the law works together. And so I was going to either ask if we could have legislative counsel weigh in on that or move to table until we get that worked out.
If I understand the point that was raised, I would direct to paragraph 5 again at line 44. Nothing in this code subsection shall be construed to limit the authority of any law enforcement officer. So if a law enforcement officer were to impose the criminal provisions cited by the gentleman, that would proceed independent of this. If the school board also took some action, as I view it, under the rules that it adopted and published according to this, that would just be a separate function. Those matters would proceed independent of each other.
Thank you. All right. Well, now we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of Senate Bill 588, which is LC 490912, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those opposed? Oh, okay, there was 6. I'm sorry. All those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4. So your bill moves forward on 6-4.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now, if you would like to present 601.
Be happy to. Again, I'm here to present Senate Bill 601. This is not a new issue. It's come before us. It's one that's timely. And we'll start by saying how fortunate I am, and my children have been, that in Hall County we have 3 terrific school systems. My wife, Teresa, worked in those school systems. And all 3 of my sons attended those public school systems, or one of the school systems, rather. And 2 of my children have required special accommodations due to health conditions. I couldn't be more thankful for the teachers and employees of our school systems, not just in my community, but around the state. However, every child is different, every system's different, and not everyone in our state is blessed with the opportunities my children have had. And I think that we've seen through the pandemic that there are more options, parental options for our schools. Another statement I'd like to make is regarding the disinformation we've heard about the tactics that have been used on both sides of this issue. I'm here to bring the conversation back to what's important, in my view, and that's the children and the families of our state who are looking for opportunities to achieve the best education possible for their children. And whether the student requires accommodations that may be unavailable in their current option, or the student is in a setting that is below the standard, 601 provides opportunities for these children. 601 provides establishes the Promise Scholarship for Georgia families. The bill is subject to appropriations, and it is not a mandate. It would provide $6,000 per family, which is roughly the average cost per pupil in our system, and the money be used for tuition and education with a $500 cap on transportation. The Georgia Student Finance Commission, which does, in my view, does a fantastic job overseeing a number of educational scholarship programs, is the agency that would oversee the program, and it has additional guardrails that would include standard requirements for participating educators, as well as the audit program, and it's be audited annually by the Department of Audits and Accounts. And again, the number of students eligible is determined by appropriations. On that note, I would point out that it does not take away from existing school funds, but provides money for the child. Our children are our future, and to many of our situations are not satisfactory. Additionally, education provides individuals the same chance to improve at their own trajectory, as well as their families. For those reasons, it is the utmost important that we provide parents and their children the options they deserve. I ask for your favorable consideration. Going into the bill itself, I would begin by pointing out on page, I'm working from Senate Bill 601, LC 490911. Just to set forth with, on page 2, we have clarifications and definitions. And then going to page 3, on line 59, we point out that it's no more than $500 per year for transportation. On page 4, on line 72, we point out that those students' parents currently reside within Georgia and United States citizens, or if not citizens, then they're lawfully present in the United States. Line 76, a child will be enrolled in public school in this state for at least 6 weeks prior. Line 79, the student's parents sign an agreement promising to provide the education in at least the subjects of reading, grammar, mathematics, social studies, and science. And we can go through line by line, but I know that time is short, so I will abbreviate my comments at that point. And again, I ask for the committee's favorable consideration.
All right. Thanks, sir. Just to make sure this is LC, just to verify, LC 490911, correct?
That's correct.
All right, we do have questions. I will call on Senator Jackson once again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pro Tem, thank you for being here again this morning, sir. Does this bill call for a physical note?
No, sir, it does not.
What's the estimated cost? How much you think this
Well, it's
will?
just within appropriation, so it might be, I mean, they might not appropriate anything, so.
Will this bill take away from the existing school funds of
No,
public
sir.
education?
No, sir, it won't. And the reason I say it won't take away from existing school funds is if a voucher removes less in funding from a school's district's budget than the district would have spent if that student stayed enrolled, then the district actually comes out ahead. So if we take that child, that's $6,000, and that $6,000 goes somewhere else, that school still, their cost hasn't changed, but their money has changed in that they're still getting their local money. So I don't think that it damages the local school system in any way.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Senator Parent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Pro Tem. I just have a couple questions. So I noted that in the bill, the student, I think, would have to attend public school for 6 weeks. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Can you explain where that number came from? Why 6 weeks?
Well, I think that 6 weeks is a reasonable amount of time that we would say that we have established an opportunity for the parent to decide if that's a appropriate learning environment for that child. And it's an arbitrary number.
Okay. A couple more questions. Thank you. Does this legislation, in terms of who receives the $6,000, is this universal or does it take family income into account?
Does not take family income into account.
Well, so that then brings up a couple other questions for me. Are you aware that 71% of private schools in Georgia cost more than $6,000 to attend, and the average is $11,000?
I was not aware of that, but thank you very much for informing me of that.
Right. So, since that's the case, and certainly in Metro Atlanta, there are a lot more.
Well, I would also ask you, what is the diversity makeup of the private schools? I think this will have an opportunity to change that.
Well, certainly they're less diverse than the public schools, but that
without
gets
question.
But you and I are on the same page here. What my question to you is, since given that they're less diverse because they are expensive to attend, and this bill does not give children enough to attend even the average. In fact, it's a little over half what it is for the average private school attendance. Not to mention anywhere in Metro Atlanta where they're significantly more expensive. You know, aren't you sort of putting private school in reach of some, but really leaving out the much bigger proportion of kids who wouldn't be able to take advantage of this?
If you would like to discuss changing it to a higher number, I'd certainly listen to you.
Well, it's your legislation. Do you think it should be? I mean, I think, Metro Atlanta, often they're probably $24,000 a year tuition per child. I mean, and if you want both the families to go, it probably needs to be more like $60,000 a year. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, that's your math and your opinion, but thank you very much for sharing it.
Hello again. Just a question, because one of the things that we all need to keep in mind, and we we bring forward a lot of bills that really do have an impact on public education. Like, public education is constitutionally mandated. I want to just talk a little bit about some of the unintended consequences of this bill and ask, because the $6,000, the truth is, if you've got a lot of kids who decide to move their kids out of their local public education system, the reality is that those schools still have overhead costs that are fixed. They still have teachers, they have buildings, they have planning that they have to do, and it does, in fact, take a drag on those schools and the school district. The dollars aren't just transferring for the child alone. There's parts of those dollars that are spent on fixed costs. And so my question is, how does this bill contemplate at all the fact that it destabilizes our public school system by allowing parents to say for 6 weeks their children could be in a public school and then move them someplace else with those dollars?
I think that the variable and the fixed cost of operating the school doesn't change. The
Right.
variable cost changes by the student, so number of students. But if you have 28 students in a class and you have 27 students in a class, then you still have the same cost to run that class. If you have more students come in and you have to hire another teacher, or if you have students leave and you hire one less teacher, then that changes the cost. I think that if you take this $6,000 that was going to be used in that particular school system and move it so that that child has a choice somewhere else, that parent has a choice somewhere else, your cost typically will not have changed. So the local money that's still coming to that school, let's just say there's 28 students, and let's just say the local school money was $28,000, just because it's easy to divide. If you had 27 students, wouldn't you have more money per student? If you changed from 28 students to 27 students, wouldn't you have more money locally per student?
Maybe, but that's,
Okay.
but what you said about the cost being fixed, that's the piece that's not, that's the part that changes that variable. I know, because this bill is talking just about the student piece, right? It costs $6,000 on average to teach our students, so that $6,000 should just be portable. But it doesn't actually just cost $6,000 a student, and there is variation between levels of school. I'll tell you, I have kids in private school and I have kids in public school. Even in private school, there's differences. High school, and I have a senior, costs more than elementary. So there's variables generally, but that exists in our public education too. It costs more to teach certain kinds of students than it costs to teach other students.
Without question, and my particular children, my oldest child needed certain accommodations.
Right.
And he was nonverbal, and the only way for him to communicate was through a communication board. And most school systems would not have the resources to provide a communication board. And the way he was able to be accommodated was that we were able to find that. If we, each child is different. Each opportunity for that child is different. We want every child to have the opportunity to establish a trajectory, to establish a pattern, establish a history of success, so that if it's special accommodations for a special needs child, fine. If it's a child that maybe is not is being bullied, fine. Give them an opportunity to go somewhere else. If it's a child that's being that's just not the right fit for that child, educationally or culturally, they need to have options, and that's what this bill is about.
One follow-up, if I may. I think that I'm certainly in agreement with the fact that every child is different and every child may need different kinds of schooling options. I'm still concerned, though, about our public school system, the things that we require of our public school system, and the things that we do not require of our private school system. And so this bill seems to be another bill that, didn't we just pass one of these last year? And I wish I knew the bill number off the top of my head, but we just passed another bill like this that actually does allow for special needs, and we expanded the definition of special needs. And so I'm wondering, we've yet to see even the effects of that, and now we're coming back again this next session saying, no, let's make even more dollars portable outside of our public school education.
If it pleases the committee, as a point of clarification, we're talking about a program that would be subject to appropriations above and beyond the school funding that would have been previously set. So it's not taking money away from the school system. We're talking about students that would have been enrolled for 6 weeks the preceding school year, not immediately. So no one's venue hopping or shopping.
All right. Who's number 4? Senator
I hate that sound. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Pro Tem, for being here. I want to make an observation and then ask you a couple questions, if I may. We're hearing two different arguments. They're diametrically opposed to each other. One is that this is so expensive that it's of little value, yet so many kids are going to take advantage of it that it's going to erode the school system.
Exactly.
So I think that we need to pick which side of the argument we're gonna fall under today. But you unpack this idea of marginal cost, and I think this is very important. I want to spend a minute on it if we can.
Please.
Districts, I think it's important to back up talk about how districts are funded. It's 3 buckets of money: local tax digest, the state funding, federal funding. In most districts, that local funding is between 40 to 50% of the total amount of funding. The state funds another 40 to 50, and the feds are about 10. And for that 10%, the federal government gets to put all sorts of tentacles into our public education, which is interesting. However, you mentioned that if a student leaves, there's still costs that remain, and then there's costs that stay. Isn't it true that we have Professor Dorfman, when he was at UGA before he joined the budget office here, did a study on 159 separate counties and looked at the marginal cost. And Mr. Pro Tem, you're from Hall County, is that correct?
That's correct.
Just looking at his study, he looked at the marginal cost for each county. The marginal cost of the cost that would leave when the student leaves is $93.17. I'm from Forsyth County, and the cost is $7,022. What county are you in? You in Lumpkin County? Lumpkin County, you represent about 10 of them, but Lumpkin County is $93.62. So just looking at those 3 counties, in fact, of the 159, over 150 of them have a marginal cost that's higher than $6,000. So what that means is that when that student leaves, a cost greater than $6,000 leaves. So to your point, because of the local funding,
yes,
the dollars that the district has per student actually increases. So to break that down to simple math, if a district had $1 per student with 10 students, and now you have the same amount of dollars, $10 of local funding, but you only have 9, the amount of money that remains in the district is higher. Isn't that true?
That's correct.
And you mentioned this being subject to appropriations, and you know, when we talk about these kinds of bills, it's always presented as binary, that there's this bucket of money that exists for public education. It's static, it's block funded. The reality, though, if you could talk about the QBE formula, maybe for those that are watching online or those that aren't here, isn't it true that's done by head count?
That's correct.
And so if those students leave, whether the $6,000 goes with them or not, isn't it true that the funding from the state to the district changes?
That's correct.
I brought the budget today, Mr. Pro Tem. The budget is quite large. It's 404 pages. And this is full of
Don't read it all.
I won't read it all. But this is full of things that we fund: Department of Banking and Finance, Department of Behavioral Health, Department of Community Affairs, Department of Community Health, Department of Corrections. Isn't it true that every dollar that we spend in these 400 and something pages is also subject to appropriations?
That's correct.
And that your plan, your bill, no more takes funding from public education than buying this bottle of water, building a road, paying our salaries, and you know, that we're going to focus on this relatively small expense as it relates to the 29, soon to be $30 billion budget, when in reality there's a whole lot of things here that you could construe, quote, compete with public education for funding.
That's absolutely true.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of statements, no questions. I think all of us agree that children, whether they're in public or private or parochial or whatever kinds of schools, or parents, let me say parents rather than children, parents deserve to have a choice. I don't think anybody on this committee denies that they should not have a choice. I think most of the Dems have children that have been in private schools and public schools. And I made that choice for my daughter years ago. But my concern is the decimation of public education in the state of Georgia over the last decade. Now, education in Georgia is probably scrutinized more than any appropriation, the appropriations that is received, than any other entity that we appropriate for. Someone mentioned, and it may have been Senator Miller, that they can also take these dollars and perhaps increase diversity in private schools. There are entrance exams. There are many ways to eliminate, get rid of children that they do not want. I do understand that here again, we're going back to choice. People make a choice, but not at the expense of the other children. And please don't tell us that they're going to take these dollars, get a better education, or they will be with open arms accepted into wherever they choose to go, because that's not true. We see children every day that if they got the vouchers or if they choose to go someplace else, if they are discipline problems, if they have disabilities that the schools are not equipped to handle, they don't keep them. If they look like me sometimes going into private education settings, they don't want them. If you can't get on a train trying to flee a war, probably won't be able to get in a school either. So those are the issues that disturb me greatly about the voucher bills and the choice, which is fine. I've never been against choice. I don't think any of us have ever been against choice. But say exactly what will happen to those children and their parents, rather than mask it with statements that aren't necessarily viable. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, we have 9 minutes till session starts. I'm not going to be able to have public input today on this, but I am prepared to go ahead, and I will say that there's 8 people who signed up in support of the bill and 13 people who showed up here today and opposed to the bill. But just for the sake of time, and we do have tomorrow is the day we have the deadline. By tomorrow morning, it started session tomorrow, all bills have to be out of committees. That's why we're doing this morning. So I will entertain a motion at this time.
Yeah, I got one. Mr. Chairman, I really, on behalf of the public, many of whom have come for 2 meetings to be heard on this particular bill because it's so consequential, I really object to rushing a bill of this consequence and not allowing people who have come to the Capitol 2 times to be heard on it to speak before trying to jam it out of committee. And I would like to move to table this until it can be thoughtfully considered.
All right, I have a motion to table.
Second, Mr. Chairman.
I have a second to table. All those in favor of tabling this bill, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. All those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, so the motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move we pass Senate Bill 601 LC 490911.
We have a motion. Mr. Roberts. Second. Senator McNeil. All right. Any further discussion? All those in favor will raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4. Motion passes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee.
This meeting is adjourned.